The cannabis industry is big business. Where does Florida fit into the mix? Welcome to the Orlando Real Estate Lifestyle, where we explore the intersection of Orlando real estate and your best life. I'm Phil Kruse, here to help you make the most out of your journey in the City Beautiful. Today, I'll be interviewing Michael Williamson, one of the nation's leading cannabis entrepreneurs, who just so happens to live right here in Florida. Michael moved to Colorado in 2009 to follow the cannabis gold rush and has since founded, operated, and sold numerous cannabis companies. He holds multiple cannabis-related patents, co-created the strain Alien Rock Candy, and continues to innovate and thrive in the cannabis space to this day. Michael, welcome to the Orlando Real Estate Lifestyle.
Well, thanks for having me, Phil. It's always good to see you.
It's great to see you. It's great to see you.
And
Guys,
to support a fellow UCF alumni.
go Knights, baby. That's what I'm talking about. All right. Michael has a lot going on, but I'm going to plug two of his key interests. One is Pipp Horticulture. You can find out more about them at pipphorticulture.com. I'll include the link to that website as well as the other one I'm about to mention in the show notes or the show description on your podcast platform. Pipp Horticulture is a company that basically does vertical farming and consults about vertical farming associated with cannabis cultivation. We're going to get more into that later. And another website you want to check out is catalyst-bc.com. It's Michael's consulting firm. If anybody out there wants to get into the cannabis space in any way you can possibly imagine, that would be a good starting point for you. Now, quickly before I ask Michael his first question, I just want to remind the listener out there that I am a real estate agent, and one of the main lead sources is listeners like you. And part of the reason I provide this free content is in the hopes that when it's your time to make a real estate decision, or your family member's time, or a friend's time, you think of me and you point it my way. You can find me at social media, on social media @_Phil Kruse. That's Kruse with a K, or just Google me, Phil Kruse, throw the word real estate at the end. You're going to find it. And don't forget, jump on your podcast platform and like my podcast, hit it with a follow so you get notified every Monday. Okay. Willie. Oh, I called you Willie. Willie's the nickname
okay.
I have.
Now we're all friends here.
Now we're all friends. I knew that was going to slip at some point. Michael, you work all over the country. You've done lots of traveling over your years and continue to do so with your various businesses. But I want to know, what about the cannabis industry in Florida? What does it look like today, and how do you see it evolving over the next, say, 5 years here in the state of Florida?
Yeah. Before I answer the Florida part, I'll tell you that each state has its own regulations and its own legal hoops to jump through to acquire a license. Some are easier barriers of entry, and others are very difficult. Florida would fall on the very difficult side of the spectrum. So currently in Florida, there's 22 licensed operators. There was a licensing window that opened up probably about 5 years ago or so. And a lot of people weren't aware. A lot of people didn't qualify. So to be a qualifying potential applicant, you had to have 30 years of agricultural experience in the state of Florida.
That's crazy.
So right there alone, I mean, that wipes out most folks. Of the traditional agriculture farmers, half of them at that time probably looked at it, or maybe even more, and said, cannabis, I'm not going to touch that. I've got my thing I've been doing with my family farm for 30, 40, 50, 60 plus years. Could be citrus, could be tropical plant nursery is really common one up here. And so, I would say probably more than half of them said, I'm not going to touch it. The other half said, I'm a struggling farm. Farming over the years in traditional agriculture or floriculture has become increasingly difficult. Basically, a lot of the new generations don't want to continue on the path of their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents in some cases, because they saw how hard it was on them.
Right, yeah.
And so what ended up happening was a lot of the entrepreneurs from other states, Colorado, California, wherever, started to partner with these farms that were interested. They say, hey, well, we qualify, but we don't know anything about cannabis. The cannabis guys came in and said, well, we know a lot about cannabis and we can bring additional capital to your projects. And so you saw a lot of, I don't want to call them shotgun weddings, but you saw a lot of quick relationships happen. Yeah. And that can be really positive or it can be really negative. So fast forward a little bit, the majority of the people that got licenses in the state of Florida originally were not granted licenses. They turned around after they were denied and they sued the state of Florida. So about half the 22 people got their license through litigation post application process, which we'll talk about a little bit later too. And so of the 22, I think only 18 or 19 of them are actually operating. There's a couple that have been sitting on their thumbs for 5 years now and not produced a product. Now in the state of Florida, it's extremely unique. We're what you call 100% vertically integrated. And I don't know many other industries that are this way. So when I say vertically integrated, it means that you control your entire supply chain and you own your entire supply chain. And at 100% vertical integration, that means that you have to grow or cultivate the product. You have to then extract the product if you want to make any kind of value add products like the ever popular gummy here with the Florida community of seniors and parents. You have to manufacture the gummy yourself. So you need a commercial kitchen. And then you also have to sell the product yourself via retail. There is no wholesale market. When I got started in Colorado, we were some of the first groups in the country to go through vertical integration, but we had a 70-30 rule. So we had to produce 70% of our own product. 30% of it we could buy, trade, or sell with other license holders. And that actually kind of worked okay. At 100% vertical integration, you basically, it eliminates overproduction because you have to sell your product. You can overproduce all you want. There are no canopy restrictions. There are no plant counts. So if I want to put 10 million plants in a greenhouse with that license, I have the ability to do that. The issue is if I don't have enough retail outlets, and with that license, it allows you an infinite amount of retail locations. So if you look at like what we call a multi-state operator or an MSO, a big MSO, that would be like True Leaf, Curaleaf, Verano. These are some of the bigger players in the space. They have operations not just in Florida, but in 10, 15, 18 different states.
Wow.
But those companies, some of them have over 100 stores currently and growing in the state of Florida. Because that's how you grow your canopy. They don't restrict your canopy, but the way that you grow it is by increasing your retail locations. Which, so, to tie it back to real estate a bit, real estate is so important, not just commercial real estate for how it's cultivated, but also retail real estate that would be applicable for a dispensary. There are some rules around it. You can't be within a certain distance of the school. There are maybe a drug rehabilitation clinic, some of these types of things. But that being said, people who get a license in cannabis in the state of Florida, they're trying to open up a retail location in a perfect world once a month for the next 3 to 5 years. And that's a pretty aggressive rollout. But from a real estate standpoint, you need a lot of retail real estate to grow your canopy.
Yeah, you do. So I have 2 questions then that you make me think of. Number one is the folks that aren't currently operating, could you go and try and buy their license from them? And that's number one. And number two, with all the complications you just said, what if I wanted to become a grower or get into the cannabis game here? How could I do that?
Yeah, I'll address the first question first. So when the first round of licenses came out about a year ago, the next day, that piece of paper, it was a golden ticket, and I don't normally like to compare alcohol to cannabis because cannabis is medicine and alcohol is not medicine. And
You'll
so,
say.
but imagine the state of Florida, right? I think we're 31 million people and growing. Every day people are flocking to Florida still. And imagine only having 22 liquor licenses in the state of Florida. The value of that license is pretty significant. So 5 years ago, the 22 licenses, if you wanted to go buy one the next day from someone, and there were some available, that was some people's plan. They said, no, I'm not going to do all this. I'm going to take the easy route out. I'm going to flip this license. That was usually somewhere between $50 and $65 million for that piece of paper.
Wow.
Which, and for most people, that's not just life-changing money, that's, multi-generational life-changing money.
No kidding. Gosh.
Now there was a second round of licensing this past year. My group did apply for a license, Catalyst BC. We partnered with a group down in Naples, Florida, who had a 90-acre parcel and met the requirements and been in business for 30 years. And beyond that, they were the right people. They're just good people. They're family at this point. We've been waiting for about a year to hear if we're going to get a license. And allegedly, it's a good timing on your podcast, by the way. Allegedly, supposedly, they're announcing the next 22 winners next month.
Wow.
Now, of course, anything and everything can delay with the state of Florida or any state at that point. So, we're excited. It's clear the state had, we actually applied 5 years ago and did not get a license. We were just a little bit late, it seemed. And along with the other people, we said, okay, I guess you got to turn around and sue the state, which never feels great. But we were part of a class action lawsuit and an individual lawsuit with the state of Florida, which both got rejected essentially. So we applied again. They opened up the window finally. It seemed like the big players that had licenses, their lobbyists did a fantastic job at delaying and blocking, while those existing 22 licenses got a really strong foothold on the market.
Yeah.
I think one of the big MSOs represents like 49% of all cannabis sold in the state of Florida.
Wow. So what I'm hearing is you were one of those folks that wanted to start essentially a vertical business, a grow operation here, and you had to partner with somebody. Is that really the only way at this point? I mean, you mentioned the 22 licenses coming out. If you haven't applied and you're not deep pockets and already
the application window was 30 days or 45 days,
Okay.
and you kind of have to be in the know. This isn't something you can just be like, oh, I'm going to go to the state website and, fill out this form and cut a check. Also, to apply, you had to do a one-time non-refundable $134,000 fee. So there was over 100 people that applied. So, what is that? Was it 10 mil?
10 million.
Like $10 million for the state, just to make sure that they have the right resources to service the industry.
Sure.
But that being said, when the application was almost identical, because we filled it out before, the state of Florida did learn a couple hard lessons, which was something around operational readiness. So they scored you higher points based off of operational readiness, because as I mentioned earlier, not all 22 licenses got activated. There's still a handful that are they're just producing just enough to keep the license. But they're not actually like generating big tax revenue. They're not creating significant jobs, that kind of thing. So the grading system this time was really around operational readiness. And from a real estate standpoint, our company owns all of our real estate. We own our 3 retail locations that have been pre-selected and approved for dispensaries. We own our 90-acre parcel, and we're ready to go. We've built greenhouses. We built an indoor facility. I mean, we're currently operating as a hemp farm, which is something else we'll probably talk about today.
Right. So why don't we stop there? Because I think that's a solid segue into the future of cannabis in Florida, and then something we're about to touch on, which is called vertical farming, which is something you've been innovating for years. Before we get to that, you listening out there, remember this, of course, is a podcast. And if you are interested in really cool guests like Michael talking about cannabis in the state of Florida, I have a bunch of other great guests that I've interviewed, like the owner of Orlando Power Yoga, Kelly Sen, like the poet laureate of the city of Orlando, Sean Welcome, and a host of other guests, plus obviously a lot of real estate specific topics and Orlando lifestyle specific topics. It's a diverse podcast for all things Orlando and beyond. Make sure to go there, follow my podcast. I drop a new episode every Monday without fail. Leave me a 5-star review and copy the link, text it to a friend or family member, or drop it on your social media. And don't forget about my real estate services. I am a listing specialist. If you have any questions about selling your home or acquiring some retail space for your cannabis grow facility, however, based on what Michael says, it sounds unlikely, hit me up. My information is going to be in the show description, the episode description, right alongside of Michael's contact information, and of course, social media at Phil Kruse. That's Kruse with a K, Kruse. So, Michael, back to you. One of the most interesting things I think that you've explained to me over the years is vertical farming and how it's revolutionized the cannabis industry relative to growing and producing high volumes of cannabis. Can you explain relative to cannabis, what is vertical farming?
Absolutely. So sometimes when people think about vertical farming, they think about it as a straight up thing. I would say the better, and not that it's common, people use the nomenclature of vertical farming, but really you want to think about it as multi-tiered farming, almost like lasagna farming, if you will. And basically what we're doing in this case is the cannabis crop is a very high value crop compared to other crops. And because of that high value, you really want to maximize your canopy footprint in a given space. Vertical farming, 98% of the time, is associated with indoor controlled environment agriculture. So that's done in an indoor building. There's a little bit of a God complex that comes into play when you are growing plants inside. You are creating and choosing the spectrum of light, the intensity of light, the amount of air exchanges in a room. You're creating an optimal environment. That's usually a combination of temperature and relative humidity, and also CO2. And so we create the environment that we believe through experience, science, and research is optimal for cannabis growth, not just in terms of yield, but also in terms of potency and what we would call in genetics trait expression, or terpenes in some cases for some folks.
I have a quick layman question. You mentioned CO2 control. Obviously, I would like to believe that the average listener out there understands that plants consume CO2 and then produce oxygen as a byproduct. Is there so much CO2 being pumped into those facilities that it's dangerous for humans to be in there for a long period of time?
Not if everything is done correctly. If there's a leak or something is incorrect, then that absolutely could be the case. Most regulations and states, you've got CO2 monitoring alerts and alarms. So your typical ambient CO2 outside or in your house is somewhere around 400 ppm or parts per million. We're typically injecting an additional 800 to 1200 parts per million. So we usually float in later stage flower growth, which really increases yield, vigor of the plant. Again, like you said, it's that symbiotic relationship that we have with plants. It's their version of oxygen.
Right.
So imagine if you were a boxer, MMA fighter or something, and you're training for a fight and you're getting 30 or 40% oxygen. Well, you're probably not going to perform at peak level. So for plants, yeah, we are, but we're in a moderate level. It's when you get over 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 parts per million that you can notice negative effects on humans. So, but
Okay.
there's redundancies and safety built into all facilities.
I've always imagined what your facilities look like. Now, I've obviously cheated and looked online at a number of your facilities, but my guess is the listener out there might have a similar picture painted in their mind. When I think of the vertical farming, I think of lasagna, I think of plants stacked on top of each other. Is there any locomotion? Are they rotating, or is it just a static rack?
So there's no rotation in it like a carousel at this time. It is basically pallet racking like you would see at a Home Depot or a Lowe's.
Okay.
And the only difference is we put them on what we call carriage systems, and that allows them to have mobility and slide back and forth.
Right.
And the reason is we can store a lot more plants or create a lot more canopy. We don't need permanent aisles. We can float our aisle through the mobile side of our vertical farming solutions. And typically, if you look at like a static racking room versus a mobile racking room, you're talking about upwards of like a 40% gain in total canopy, which in cannabis, I mean, that can be millions of dollars a year easy.
Sure. So are there operators in the state of Florida that aren't using these sorts of systems? Are they just growing outside like we've seen in the movies or anything like that?
A lot of them started off in greenhouses and realized that, depending on which part of the ridge, there's a couple ridges in the state of Florida. You have one in the center of the state near Mount Dora kind of area, and then we've got another one down south. So we actually have quite a bit of microclimate, but depending on if you're coastal or if you're inland, that high humidity is really challenging to remove in a greenhouse. So a lot of people started in greenhouses. Some are still operating in greenhouses, but a lot of them have transitioned to an indoor controlled environment agriculture for that kind of, God complex of creating the optimal environment, because in our outdoor environments, you will be challenged with mold, mildew, yeast, fungi, and pests.
Right.
I would say the growing season in Florida, which is very different than the rest of the country, is actually like in the winter,
Yeah, it's less heat. The heat crushes plants.
And our winters are temperate and perfect, and so a lot of greenhouse growers in Florida, if they're smart, they're most likely growing 4 crops a year, and they're probably taking summers off because it's just not worth the battle. That's a good time to clean your greenhouse, do repairs, maybe do some light construction, change out stuff, that kind of thing.
Last question with the vertical farming. How has vertical farming that you've focused on, I know you hold a number of patents in this space, and obviously this is what you literally do every single day. Has that made the jump into other forms of agriculture, other crops?
It has. It's interesting. So I would say that maybe sub 10% of our customers and sales are non-cannabis.
Hmm.
There's a ton of research going on. Leafy greens is a common one. So we have in the leafy green world, we've worked with some of the best. One of them is Planet Detroit out of Detroit. They have a leafy green facility that offers salads and things of that nature to local restaurants. And then I did a podcast with them actually about 4 years ago. And I said, well, what do
Ooh,
you do with your waste? And they
yeah.
said, we have something called community refrigerators. And I go, what's a community refrigerator? And they actually partner with random people in high needs areas and low
Yeah.
income areas that will allow them to plug a refrigerator in their front yard. They had a bunch of artists come and paint the front and make it, artsy.
Nice.
And they take their, what would be basically like a day old, and they put them in these refrigerators and they're free for anyone in the community that needs to feed their family.
That's so cool.
Other
That's
crops,
cool.
though, real quick, strawberries are being experimented with. We've got a project in Bermuda where they're basically saying, hey, we spend X amount of dollars importing strawberries. The quality is not good. We want to be 100% self-sufficient on strawberries, and we want to figure out what that looks like, as an example.
Nice. And I'm a type of guy that I think about sustainability relative to Mother Earth. And I know that you're like that and then some. To me, it's exciting to have an industry like cannabis that's pushing the envelope every day. How do we increase crop yield? How do we increase our bottom line, make more money? And taking that innovation and applying it to more consumable crops in the sense of food crops. I think there's huge potential there. And I'm happy to hear it's already happening. And I'm happy to hear that you're already involved in it.
Well, the reality is we've depleted the earth. The invention of the plow, I think it was like 1897 or something. I mean, once we started digging into the earth that way and
Yeah.
depleting nutrients and replacing it with salts and spraying it with chemicals and fertilizers, our food lacks nutrition.
Yeah.
If you've been to Europe and you've had food, people go to Italy and they're like, the food is so good. The chefs are so good and this, that, and the other. It's like chefs are using simple ingredients. It's not the chef. I mean, to some degree, I don't want to discredit the chef, but it's the food. People forget that tomato has a smell. They forget that when you cut open a tomato, it shouldn't be white. It should be red.
Right.
Uh, it has an amazing aroma, has amazing flavor. And sometimes, you get a tomato out and about and it's like, there's just nothing there.
Well, yeah, what is that? So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I know you and I could talk about that for an entire another podcast,
Sure.
sustainability and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to get to my last topic, my last question. A lot of people that I interview on this show are entrepreneurs at their core. I'm an entrepreneur and you are that times 10. You got a golf cart business I learned about that you're running alongside of your wife in Sarasota. You guys started your own school over there. So much more than just the big cannabis stuff. So for the entrepreneur out there listening to this program, what is some advice you can give to them?
My successes come from being part of a team. I haven't I haven't done anything extremely incredible by myself. Um, and so when I think about forming a team, it's important that you have an honest conversation with yourself and you say, where am I weak? That's what I did. That's all I did. I said, where am I weak? What am I really good at? What am I the best at? What do people think I'm the best at? What do I like to do? What gets me excited every morning? What gives me that oomph to get up out of bed and grind really hard? And so I had an honest conversation with myself and I said, here's where you're weak. And I found people that were strong in the areas that I was weak. Like at Catalyst, we're a team of ex and current owner operators that have had success and successful exits in the cannabis space. So we see things from a totally different perspective. I'm more on a cultivation side. I'm more startup director of operations. I like to play in between the chiefs and kind of the ground boots workforce. I said that wrong, boots on the ground workforce.
Yeah, it's all good. We got you.
Yeah. Um, and so I like to bridge those gaps. I like to be in all meetings. And so for me, when I go into a new facility as a consultant, people are like, oh, you spend a lot of time with the growers and the executives. And a lot of times I don't. If I want to go get the answer, sometimes I've learned that a lot of these executives and even the growers sometimes they're so overwhelmed. They might have an office in another location. They're not connected to their operation. So when I want to go find out what's really happening, I go to basically the post-harvest team, which is typically an entry-level job, but they're the ones that see the product last, they touch the product last, and they know where there's challenges in the grow. They know, oh, this one is susceptible to mold. This one doesn't trim that well. You
Right.
know, they have all those details that I'm looking for. And so, you know, for me, it's about not just working with my own team, but working with other people's team to make sure that I have all the parts and pieces of the puzzle. Because typically I do a lot of problem solving, and I look at almost every project that I have as a Rubik's Cube. And so I'm just trying to make sure that I understand the rules of the game and that I understand all the problems, because a lot of times as a consultant, they may give you the problems as they see them,
Right.
but because they're so connected with their operation, there's a whole bunch of other problems that are burning their house down that they're not even aware of. And so I'm just trying to make sure that I always take a holistic approach. You know, by all means, I'm a subject matter expert. Most people think I'm this guru. I'm still learning every day, Phil, just like you. I know you're on
Right.
that same track.
Absolutely.
And
Continuous growth.
I learn from my teammates. I learn from my clients and customers. And I share that knowledge. I don't hold it back. If I know something to be true and beneficial, I share it with the world. And you'll see that on pipphorticulture.com. People are like, oh, why do you guys put out all this information? And it's like, because I want to see you be successful with our product. And the more successful you are, the more likely you are to have a phase 2 construction expansion. The more successful you are, the more likely you are to talk about it with someone else that may want to buy a product from us. So it's really just kind of a share the love, share the knowledge with people that want to listen and learn about it.
Right. It's about how you approach problems. It's about your energy. It's about how you treat people. You know, I mentor engineering students from UCF. I've been doing that for almost 10 years. I always tell them it's not what you know, it's who you know. You know, an engineering degree is just a piece of paper that society perceives that labels you as smart. But at the end of the day, if you want to get somewhere in business and life, you got to surround yourself with the right people. And it starts as a college student. You and I both we met in college and have had long and continue to have long-standing relationships with a lot of successful people. So that's a huge thing. So I love that you led with other people, and supporting, plugging the holes in your boat, uh, building a team around yourself. These are all great entrepreneurial lessons. But one thing I want to highlight, Michael, is the fact that you are a hard worker. You're one of the hardest workers I know. You do it with grace, and you're always willing to share, help, talk. I mean, as you're on the podcast with me right now, but I know you're busy. You're busy all the time. We all are. So thank you for that. And it's amazing to hear your words of wisdom.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on the entrepreneurial note is like, and I know this is true for you because I spent a lot of time with you in lots of different, you know, sport and game type situations. The best entrepreneurs I know, they love to win.
Yeah.
They love to win. They love to be first, you know, and now we're in this, you know, I don't know, evolutionary time where it's like participation awards are cool and this, that, and the other. And, you know, I have different opinions than most, but I think it's important that whether it's young kids, high school kids, and new entrepreneurs, is like winning is good. It's good to win. And I notice that that's the people that I know that are the most successful. They wanted almost everything that they did because they had that just tenacious, like they wanted to be the best. And maybe that's an internal battle. And maybe in some cases, when you're out in the world of business, that's an external battle a bit too.
Yeah,
But that's a
absolutely.
common theme I see.
No, I love it. I love it. You know, the participation trophy culture is a real thing. And regardless of what the listener thinks about that, you know, your opinion makes a lot of sense. Those that cultivate a winning mindset from day one, certainly more likely to pursue that in an adult when they're adults and in the business world. Resonates with me. Michael, that was my last question for you. And to recap, you know, your journey is inspiring, and to hear about vertical farming and how can it apply to other crops, and the status of cannabis in the state of Florida, the fact that 22 new licenses are about to be released. That to me is a bombshell. I didn't know that. Sounds like it's exciting times. You're obviously back and getting involved with your new Florida-based operation. I'm so excited. If people want to learn more about your Pipp Horticulture and your consulting firm or anything else about you specifically, where can they go to find that stuff out?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're trying to get in the cannabis industry or you have questions, it typically will start with talking to either an attorney or a consultant. I would start with a consultant first because you'll get more free information out of them. But catalyst-bc.com is our firm. We do first-time phone calls. So if someone's thinking about putting their toe in, if you're a commercial real estate person listening to this, the average indoor controlled environment agriculture farm in Florida, a small one is 300,000 square feet. The largest one is well over 1.2 million square feet. So there's really nice opportunities for commercial real estate folks to work hand in hand with the cannabis industry. And as I mentioned earlier, there's an infinite amount of retails that need to be opened up. And so if you've got big retail footprint or anything like that, that's of value to me personally and to others who are about to be getting a license. So if you heard this podcast and you fall into one of those two categories, I'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, sure. I would as well. And Michael, we could talk more about that after the podcast and drill into that more, see what I can produce from a real estate perspective.
Sure.
I appreciate that insight. That's awesome. I'll include Michael's websites in the show notes, the show description. You just click on the description of your podcast platform there below my beautiful face, and you'll find his information. And of course, as well as mine, that includes my real estate services as a listing specialist. And if you have any real estate needs in Central Florida, please contact me. My cell phone is listed right there. You can shoot me a text or find me on Instagram, Facebook. Search Phil Kruse. That's Kruse with a K, Kruse. Throw real estate in there at the end. You're going to find me everywhere. And while you're on my podcast, go ahead and follow it. Hit the bell, subscribe, like, whatever the podcast platform needs you to do for you to get those notifications. Please do, and drop me a 5-star review. Michael, thank you so much for being on my podcast today.
Pleasure is all mine, Phil. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure too. It's my pleasure. And to you, the listener, always know that your best life in Orlando is within reach. Keep embracing every moment. Cheers. Thank you, Michael.